I wasn't supposed to hear it. I had stopped by my son Ryan's house to drop off a pie I'd baked that morning. The side door was unlocked, just like it had always been. As I stepped inside, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Then Ryan lowered his voice and said something that made my blood run cold. "She'll never know." A second later, my daughter-in-law Vanessa laughed softly. "Not if we handle the paperwork before the transfer." I froze behind the door, my hand gripping the pie dish so tightly my fingers hurt. They were talking about someone. And deep down, before I even knew why, I was terrified that someone was me. If you've ever discovered a secret that changed the way you saw your own family, I'd love to hear your story. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family dramas like this one. And before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'm reading every comment, and I'd love to know who's joining me on this journey. My name is Thelma Hughes, and until that moment behind my son's kitchen door, I believed I was one of the lucky ones. I was 67 years old, retired, and living in the same Columbus, Ohio house where my husband and I had spent most of our married life. Every creak in the floorboards carried a memory. Every photograph on the walls told part of our story. Frank and I had been married for 42 years. 42 years. When people talk about soulmates, I usually smile because I know how rare that kind of love really is. Frank wasn't perfect, and neither was I. We argued about money, about vacations, about how many Christmas decorations belonged on the front porch. But we always found our way back to each other. Then 2 years ago, cancer took him from me. It happened faster than anyone expected. 1 month he was mowing the lawn. The next month he was sitting in a hospital room holding my hand and telling me everything would be okay. The last thing Frank ever said to me was, "Take care of yourself, sweetheart." I promised him I would. For a while, I wasn't sure how. After his funeral, the silence inside our house became unbearable. I would wake up in the middle of the night expecting to hear his breathing beside me. Instead, there was only emptiness. That's when Ryan stepped in. My son had always been a good boy growing up. Responsible, polite, hardworking, the kind of child every parent hopes to raise. When he married Vanessa 12 years ago, I welcomed her into our family with open arms. At first, she seemed wonderful. She was confident, organized, and ambitious. She remembered birthdays. She brought flowers when she visited. She called me Mom even though I always told her she didn't have to. After Frank died, both of them became even more attentive. Ryan started visiting every weekend, sometimes twice a week. He would bring groceries and insist on carrying everything inside. He fixed loose cabinet doors. He changed light bulbs. He mowed the lawn when I told him he didn't need to. Vanessa often came with him. She would sit at my kitchen table drinking coffee while we talked for hours. Sometimes she brought homemade casseroles. Other times she showed me photographs from vacations or family gatherings. Looking back now, I wonder if those conversations were genuine. At the time, I never questioned them. I was simply grateful not to be alone. When you lose the person you've spent decades with, loneliness can make you trust people more than you should. That's something nobody tells you. Loneliness doesn't just hurt. It clouds your judgment. One afternoon, several months after Frank's death, Vanessa asked an innocent question. Or at least it sounded innocent. "The market is crazy right now," she said while scrolling through listings on her phone. "Have you ever wondered what this house might be worth?" I laughed. "Not really." She looked around my living room. "It's beautiful. Houses in this neighborhood are selling for a fortune." I shrugged. "I don't plan on selling." She smiled and changed the subject. I forgot about the conversation until she brought it up again, and again, and again. Over the next year, Vanessa mentioned property values at least a dozen times, never directly, never aggressively, always casually, as though she was merely making conversation. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Now I remembered every single word. Another thing began bothering me. Ryan occasionally talked about aging in ways that felt strange. One evening while we were eating dinner together, he asked, "Have you ever thought about what happens if you can't live alone anymore?" I laughed. "I still drive myself everywhere." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm just thinking ahead." Vanessa nodded. "It's important to have a plan." "A plan for what?" I asked. "For the future." I remember feeling slightly uncomfortable. Not scared, just uncomfortable. As though they were discussing something I wasn't ready to consider. I changed the subject. They let it go. Or at least they appeared to. Months passed. Life settled into a routine. I volunteered at church twice a week. I met friends for breakfast on Thursdays. I spent evenings reading in Frank's old recliner. From the outside, everything seemed normal. Yet little things kept happening. Small things. Easy to ignore things. One afternoon, I arrived at Ryan's house unexpectedly after finding an old photo album I thought he'd enjoy seeing. As I walked inside, I heard Ryan and Vanessa talking in the kitchen. The conversation stopped immediately. Not gradually, immediately. The silence felt unnatural. A moment later, Vanessa appeared with a smile that seemed forced. "Oh, Thelma, we didn't know you were coming." Neither of them mentioned whatever they had been discussing. I noticed Ryan quickly close his laptop. Again, I ignored it. Because that's what mothers do. We explain away uncomfortable truths. We make excuses for the people we love. We choose the version of reality that hurts less. Another time, Vanessa asked whether I had updated my will recently. The question came out of nowhere. We were shopping for groceries. I was comparing soup labels. Suddenly, she asked, "When was the last time you reviewed your estate documents?" I stared at her. "My what?" "Your estate documents." I laughed. "Why would I be thinking about that while buying soup?" She laughed too, but something about her expression seemed disappointed, as if she had hoped for a different answer. That night I found myself lying awake in bed. For the first time, a small seed of doubt entered my mind. Not suspicion, just doubt. I tried to push it away. Ryan was my son, my only child. The little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard. The teenager who cried when our dog died. The young man who stood beside me at Frank's funeral and promised he'd always be there for me. People don't suddenly become strangers. Do they? I wanted to believe they didn't. Then came another moment I couldn't ignore. During a family dinner, Ryan mentioned a luxury assisted living community outside Columbus. He spent nearly 10 minutes describing it. The amenities, the medical staff, the beautiful grounds, the social activities. When he finished, I looked at him and laughed. "It sounds lovely." "It is lovely," he said. Then he added something that stayed with me. "You'd fit in there." The room went quiet. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Vanessa quickly smiled. "We're just talking, Thelma." I forced a smile back. But inside, something had changed. For the first time since Frank died, I began wondering whether the people sitting across from me were seeing me as a mother, or as a problem that needed solving. I didn't know it yet, but the answer to that question was already waiting for me behind a kitchen door. And very soon I was going to hear words that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The first time Ryan offered to help manage my bills, I thought it was an act of love. Now I know that some of the most dangerous betrayals begin disguised as kindness. About 6 months before I overheard that conversation in his kitchen, I had a minor accident in my backyard. It wasn't dramatic. I wasn't rushed to the hospital. I simply tripped over a garden hose while watering my flowers and landed awkwardly on my side. The fall bruised my hip and strained my ankle. The pain was enough to keep me moving slowly for several weeks. When Ryan found out, he rushed to my house immediately. I remember sitting in my recliner with an ice pack on my leg when he walked through the front door looking genuinely worried. "Mom, why didn't you call me sooner?" he asked. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. A fall at your age is a big deal. The words stung slightly. At 67, I didn't think of myself as old, but I knew he meant well. At least I thought he did. Over the next few weeks, Ryan became even more involved in my daily life. He started stopping by almost every evening. He picked up prescriptions. He carried laundry baskets downstairs. He drove me to physical therapy appointments. I was touched by his concern. One evening, while helping organize my mail, he casually brought up my finances. "Mom, you've got a lot to keep track of." I glanced at the stack of envelopes. "I've managed for years." "I know," he smiled. "But there's nothing wrong with having help." I didn't argue. The truth was that after Frank died, handling everything alone sometimes felt overwhelming. For decades, we had divided responsibilities. Frank handled certain things, I handled others. Suddenly, all of it belonged to me. Taxes, insurance, utilities, bank accounts, investment statements. It wasn't impossible. It was simply exhausting. Ryan seemed to sense that. "You should let me help," he said, "just temporarily." I hesitated. Then I nodded. Maybe. Looking back, that single word changed everything. Within weeks, Ryan had access to far more information than he ever needed. He began sorting my mail before I saw it. He organized financial folders. He reviewed utility bills. He even created spreadsheets tracking household expenses. At first, I was impressed. He seemed responsible, attentive, protective. The kind of son any mother would be proud of. Then Vanessa became involved. One Saturday afternoon, she arrived carrying a leather binder. "I've been thinking about your future planning," she said. "My future planning." She nodded enthusiastically. "Medical directives, emergency contacts, long-term care planning." The binder contained dozens of forms. Most appeared legitimate. Healthcare information, emergency instructions, personal records. Nothing seemed unusual. Still, something felt strange. "Why all this?" I asked. Vanessa smiled. "We just want to make sure you're protected." Protected. That word would appear again and again over the following months. Every suggestion, every request, every document, everything was supposedly for my protection. At the time, I believed her. I wanted to believe her, because the alternative was unthinkable. The first truly suspicious incident happened several weeks later. I was expecting a bank statement. The statement never arrived. At first, I assumed the mail had been delayed. A few days later, I contacted the bank. The representative informed me the statement had already been delivered. I checked my mailbox again. Nothing. The missing envelope bothered me more than it should have. When Ryan visited later that evening, I mentioned it casually. To my surprise, he immediately answered. "Oh, that statement." I looked up. "What statement?" "The bank statement." My stomach tightened. "You saw it?" "Yeah." He seemed unconcerned. "It arrived with some other mail. I probably put it somewhere." Probably. Somewhere. The answer felt vague. Too vague. When I asked where exactly he had placed it, he couldn't remember. Eventually, he found it inside a drawer in my kitchen. The explanation should have satisfied me. Instead, it left me unsettled. Why had he opened it? Why hadn't he told me? And why did he seem irritated when I asked? A few weeks later, something similar happened again. This time, it involved an insurance document. Then another financial notice. Each incident seemed small, insignificant. But together they formed a pattern. One evening, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table staring at a pile of paperwork. For the first time, I wondered whether I was slowly losing control over my own affairs. The thought frightened me, not because I believed Ryan was doing anything wrong, because I wasn't sure anymore. Meanwhile, Vanessa's questions became increasingly specific. One afternoon, she joined me for coffee. The conversation started normally: weather, church events, local news. Then she casually asked, "Do you know exactly how your house is titled?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Ownership records." I laughed nervously. "I've never paid much attention." Her eyes remained fixed on me. "You should." Something about her tone felt different. Not curious, interested. Very interested. For the first time, I didn't answer. The silence between us lasted several seconds. Eventually, she smiled and changed the subject. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just failed some kind of test. That night, I walked through my house carrying an old photo album. Pictures of birthdays, anniversaries, family vacations. Ryan appeared in hundreds of them, a smiling child, a laughing teenager, a proud young husband. I searched those photographs for signs I might have missed, but pictures only show what people want you to see. They don't reveal intentions, they don't reveal secrets, they don't reveal greed. Around that same time, another strange event occurred. I received a phone call from my bank regarding account verification. The representative asked about a recent inquiry, an inquiry I knew nothing about. Apparently, someone had requested information regarding account authorization options, additional access permissions, emergency financial management procedures. The questions were legitimate. But I hadn't asked them. When I mentioned it to Ryan later, his reaction was immediate. Too immediate. "Oh, that was me." I stared at him. "You called my bank." "I was just gathering information." "For what?" "In case something ever happened." Something ever happened. Again. Always planning for a future where I became incapable, dependent, unable to manage my own affairs. The conversation left me uneasy for days. Then came the moment that changed everything. One rainy afternoon, I was organizing papers in my home office when I discovered something unusual. Inside a folder sat several photocopied documents: property tax records, insurance paperwork, home valuation reports, recent market analyses, all related to my house. My house. The same house Vanessa seemed obsessed with discussing. The same house Ryan kept mentioning whenever future planning came up. The same house Frank and I had spent decades paying off. My hands trembled as I examined the documents. Why would they need these? Why collect all this information without telling me I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation? I truly did. But for the first time, doubt became suspicion. Real suspicion. Still, I didn't confront them. I wasn't ready. I needed facts, not fears, not assumptions. Facts. Unfortunately, the facts were already moving toward me, quietly, patiently, like a storm gathering on the horizon. And very soon I would walk into Ryan's house unexpectedly and hear a conversation that would transform every uneasy feeling into something far worse. Because what I was about to discover wasn't merely concern, it wasn't planning, and it certainly wasn't love. It was a secret they believed I would never uncover. 3 days after finding those property documents, I finally heard the conversation that destroyed every remaining illusion I had about my son and daughter-in-law. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky over Columbus was gray and heavy with rain. I had spent the morning running errands and decided to stop by Ryan's house on my way home. I wasn't planning to stay long. I simply wanted to drop off a container of chicken soup I'd made the night before. Ryan loved that recipe growing up. Whenever he was sick as a child, I'd make the same soup. Back then, it had been my way of taking care of him. Now, standing outside his front door, I had no idea my entire life was about to change. I parked in the driveway and walked toward the side entrance. The house was quiet. No television, no music, no barking dog. Just silence. The side door wasn't completely closed. It stood slightly open. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. That's when I heard voices. Ryan's voice, Vanessa's voice. They were in the kitchen. At first, I wasn't paying attention. I assumed they were discussing work or weekend plans. Then I heard Vanessa say something that made me stop walking. "The transfer needs to happen soon." My heart skipped. Transfer. I stood motionless. Something in her tone felt serious, calculated. Not casual conversation, not everyday family talk. I remained where I was hidden behind the partially open door, separating the hallway from the kitchen. A few seconds later, Ryan answered. "Relax." His voice was calm, confident. "She'll never know." The words hit me like a punch. For a moment, I honestly thought I might faint. Every instinct told me they were talking about me, but I couldn't understand why. Then Vanessa spoke again. "What if she changes her mind?" Ryan laughed softly. "Mom trusts me." Mom. There was no doubt anymore. They were talking about me. My knees felt weak. I tightened my grip on the soup container. Part of me wanted to walk into the kitchen immediately and demand answers. But another part, the part that had spent months noticing small warning signs, told me to stay quiet. Listen. Learn. Don't react. Not yet. Vanessa lowered her voice slightly. "I still think we should get everything signed before mentioning the facility." Facility. The word sent a chill through my body. I barely breathed. Ryan sighed. "We've already talked about this." "Not enough." "Vanessa, what if she refuses?" There was a brief silence. Then Ryan spoke again. "If that happens, we'll deal with it." My stomach twisted. Deal with it? What exactly were they planning? I felt like I was standing outside my own life listening to strangers discuss a woman they barely cared about. Except that woman was me. Vanessa continued. "The house is the real issue." House. There it was. The word I'd been hearing over and over for months. The house. The property values, the ownership records, the paperwork, the estate questions, everything suddenly connected. Every uncomfortable conversation, every strange question, every missing document. I felt cold from head to toe. Ryan's voice became quieter. "We can't do anything until the signatures are finished." Signatures. My pulse raced. What signatures? I hadn't signed anything. At least not knowingly. Vanessa sounded frustrated. "Then maybe you need to push harder." Push harder. The words echoed in my mind. I suddenly remembered all those conversations about assisted living, all those discussions about planning ahead, all those carefully worded suggestions. Had they been preparing me from the beginning? Had every act of kindness been leading toward this moment? My hands began shaking. The soup container nearly slipped from my fingers. I leaned against the wall to steady myself. Inside the kitchen, neither of them realized I was only a few feet away. Vanessa spoke again. Once she's in a care facility, everything becomes easier. I closed my eyes. The sentence felt like a knife. Not because I feared assisted living itself. Many wonderful people live in assisted living communities. What hurt was hearing my future discussed as though I weren't a human being, as though I were an obstacle, a problem, something to be managed, something to be moved. Ryan remained silent for several seconds. Then he said something that broke my heart more than anything else. Just give it a little more time. Not Mom would never agree. Not, this isn't right. Not, she's my mother. Just give it a little more time. In that moment, I realized he wasn't being manipulated. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't protecting me. He was participating. The son I trusted was helping plan whatever this was. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood perfectly still. Years of nursing had taught me something important. When emotions run high, information becomes your greatest weapon. Stay calm. Observe. Gather facts. Act later. I forced myself to keep listening. Vanessa opened what sounded like a folder. Papers shuffled. I've already talked to the realtor. Realtor. The word hit me immediately. Of course. Vanessa worked in real estate. She knew property values. She knew how homes were sold. My house, Frank's house, our house. Suddenly, I understood why she'd been so interested. Ryan asked quietly, "What did he say?" He said the property would move fast. My throat tightened. They were discussing selling my home. Not maybe. Not someday. Actively discussing it. The realization was so overwhelming, I almost stepped into the room. Almost. Then Vanessa said something even worse. Once the house is sold, we'll finally be able to pay off everything. Everything. Debt. Money. Now the picture was becoming clearer. This wasn't about my health. This wasn't about my safety. This wasn't about concern. This was about money. My money. My home. My assets. Their financial problems. And I was the solution. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely afraid of my own family. Not physically afraid. Emotionally afraid. Because betrayal from strangers is painful. Betrayal from your child is devastating. I slowly backed away from the doorway, one careful step at a time. My heart was pounding so loudly I worried they might hear it. Fortunately, they remained focused on their conversation. Within seconds, I reached the side entrance. Then I slipped outside. The rain had started falling. Cold droplets struck my face. I barely noticed. I sat inside my car without starting the engine. For several minutes, I simply stared through the windshield. My hands trembled. My chest hurt. I couldn't stop hearing Ryan's voice. Mom trusts me. The saddest part was that he had been right. I did trust him. Completely. Unconditionally. The way only a mother can. And he had used that trust against me. Eventually, I drove home. The soup remained untouched in the passenger seat. That evening, I sat alone in Frank's recliner and replayed every word I'd heard. Transfer. Facility. House, signatures, realtor, everything. The pieces finally fit together, but there were still gaps. I needed proof, real proof, not assumptions, not suspicions, proof. Because if I confronted Ryan now, he would deny everything. Vanessa would deny everything. They would call it a misunderstanding, a mistake, an overreaction. No. I needed evidence. I needed documents. I needed answers. Most importantly, I needed to know how far their plan had already progressed. What I didn't realize then was that the truth would be even worse than I imagined, because the next discoveries waiting for me weren't hidden in conversations, they were hidden in paperwork. And some of those papers had already begun moving through the legal system. The morning after I overheard Ryan and Vanessa discussing my house, I woke up feeling 20 years older. Not because of my age, because betrayal has a way of aging a person overnight. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Ryan's voice again. "Mom trusts me." The words echoed through my mind like a cruel joke. For most of my life, trust had been simple. You gave it to the people you loved. You believed they would protect it. You never imagined they might use it against you. But now everything felt different. The house felt different. The photographs on my walls felt different. Even the memories felt different. As painful as it was, I knew one thing for certain. I could no longer afford to be naive. If Ryan and Vanessa were planning something, I needed to understand exactly what it was. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Immediately. That afternoon, I began examining every document in my home. For hours, I sat at my dining room table, surrounded by folders, envelopes, account statements, tax records, insurance forms, and legal paperwork. Frank had always been organized. Thankfully, I had inherited that habit. Most documents were exactly where they should have been. Others weren't. The missing pieces bothered me. There were gaps, small gaps, but enough to raise concern. One folder labeled Property Records contained several missing documents. Another folder held copies rather than originals. I couldn't remember making those copies. As I continued sorting through paperwork, I discovered something even stranger. Several documents contained yellow sticky notes. Not my handwriting, Vanessa's. I recognized it immediately. Neat, precise, almost mechanical. One note simply read Review Ownership. Another read Future Transfer Options. My stomach tightened. Why was my daughter-in-law making notes about ownership transfers? Why was she studying documents that belonged to me? The more I searched, the more uncomfortable I became. Then I found something hidden inside an estate planning folder. A photocopy request form. The request had been submitted nearly 4 months earlier. The requester Ryan Hughes. The records requested property deeds, trust documents, ownership information. I stared at the paper for several seconds. My hands trembled. He had never mentioned this. Not once. I remembered every conversation we'd had during those 4 months. Birthdays, family dinners, holiday gatherings, coffee visits. Never once had Ryan told me he was obtaining copies of my legal records. Why keep it secret? The answer frightened me because it seemed obvious. People rarely hide innocent actions. That evening, Ryan called. The sound of his voice almost broke my heart. "Hey, Mom." The same voice that used to call me from Little League games. The same voice that once asked me to check under his bed for monsters. Now I heard something else. Something I had never noticed before. Calculation. I forced myself to sound normal. "Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay?" "Of course." We chatted for several minutes. Weather, groceries, church events, nothing important. Then Ryan casually said something that caught my attention. "Did you get those forms Vanessa gave you?" Forms. Immediately I knew what he meant. The binder, the medical paperwork, the planning documents. "Yes," I replied carefully. "What did you think?" "I haven't looked through everything yet." A brief silence followed. Then Ryan spoke again. "You should." His tone sounded unusually firm. "They're important." Important? I wondered which forms interested him most. The healthcare directives, or something else hidden among them. After we hung up, I retrieved the binder from a bookshelf. For the first time, I examined every page carefully. Very carefully. And that's when I discovered something alarming. Most of the documents appeared routine. Medical authorizations, emergency contacts, treatment preferences. Nothing unusual, but buried deep within the packet were several forms that had little to do with healthcare. Property management authorizations, financial access permissions, limited power designations, temporary control provisions. The language was complex, legal, easy for someone to overlook, particularly an older person who trusted the people handing them the papers. I read each page twice, then 3 times. The more I read, the more uncomfortable I became. Some sections would have granted another person authority to handle significant financial matters under certain circumstances. The definitions of those circumstances felt disturbingly broad, very broad. Broad enough to create opportunities for abuse. I wasn't an attorney, but I wasn't foolish either. For the first time, I began wondering whether the entire package had been designed to accomplish something very specific, something that had nothing to do with protecting me. The next surprise arrived 2 days later. A certified letter appeared in my mailbox. My heart sank the moment I saw it. Most people don't receive certified legal correspondence for pleasant reasons. I carried the envelope inside and opened it carefully. The letter came from a legal services office I didn't recognize. Its language was formal, technical, confusing. But one phrase immediately caught my attention. Property transition consultation. Property. Again. Always the house? Always the property. Always ownership. The letter referenced preliminary discussions regarding future asset planning. Discussions I had never participated in. I read the document 3 times, then 4. Each reading made me angrier. Someone had initiated conversations involving my assets without fully informing me. Someone had been moving pieces on a board while I remained unaware the game had even started. That evening, I called the number listed on the letter. A receptionist answered. After verifying my identity, she reviewed the file. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "According to our records, your son previously contacted our office regarding potential future property arrangements." My son, not me. My son. I gripped the phone tighter. When? The date she provided was nearly 6 months old. 6 months. 6 months of conversations. 6 months of planning. 6 months during which Ryan smiled at me across dinner tables and pretended everything was normal. I thanked the receptionist and ended the call. Then I sat silently in my kitchen. The house felt unusually quiet. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the yard Frank once loved. I looked toward the back garden where he used to spend entire weekends tending roses. Suddenly, I wished more than anything that he were sitting across from me. Frank had always been able to see through people. He noticed things I missed. He trusted slowly, carefully, wisely. I wondered what he would say now. Probably something simple, something practical, something like, "Get facts before you act." And that was exactly what I intended to do. I couldn't confront Ryan yet, not without evidence, not without understanding the full picture. Because if I accused him too early, he would hide everything. Vanessa would destroy documents, stories would change, evidence would disappear. No. I needed help. Professional help. Someone who understood legal documents better than I did. Someone who couldn't be manipulated by emotional excuses. Someone who would tell me the truth even if the truth hurt. As I sat there staring at Frank's photograph on the mantel, a memory surfaced. Years ago, Frank had insisted we work with a trusted attorney. A man named Richard Bennett. Not just an attorney, a longtime friend. Someone Frank respected deeply. At the time, I hadn't thought much about it. Now, I remembered. And for the first time since overhearing Ryan and Vanessa, I felt something besides fear. Hope. Maybe someone out there already knew more than I did. Maybe someone could explain what was happening. Maybe someone could help me protect myself before it was too late. What I didn't know was that Richard Bennett had already heard Ryan's name before. And the information waiting inside his office would reveal that my son had gone much further than I ever imagined. The next morning, I called Linda Parker. If you've ever had a friend who feels more like family than some of your actual relatives, then you'll understand what Linda meant to me. We had known each other for nearly 30 years. We attended the same church. We survived widowhood together. We shared holidays, heartbreaks, and countless cups of coffee. Most importantly, Linda was one of the few people in my life who never told me only what I wanted to hear. She told me what I needed to hear. When she arrived at my house that afternoon, one look at my face told her something was wrong. "Thelma," she said quietly, "what happened?" For several minutes I couldn't speak. The emotions I had been carrying finally overwhelmed me. I told her everything. The missing documents, the conversations, the property records, the legal letter, the words I had overheard behind Ryan's kitchen door. Most painful of all, I told her about hearing my own son say, "She'll never know." By the time I finished, tears were running down my face. Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Oh, sweetheart." I looked away. "I keep hoping there's another explanation." Linda didn't answer immediately. That silence told me everything. She wasn't trying to invent excuses for Ryan. She wasn't dismissing my concerns. She believed me, and somehow that hurt even more. After a few moments, she spoke. "Thelma, I need you to listen carefully." I nodded. "Don't sign anything." I wasn't planning to. "I'm serious." "I know. No matter what Ryan says, no matter what Vanessa says, no matter how much pressure they put on you." Her voice was firm. "Don't sign a single document." A chill moved through me. The fact that Linda felt the need to say it so strongly frightened me. Then she asked a question. "Have you spoken to Richard Bennett?" The name immediately brought back memories. Richard Bennett, Frank's attorney, his friend, the man who handled nearly every major legal matter during our marriage. I shook my head. "Not yet." Linda stood up immediately. "Then we're going. Today. Today." For the first time in weeks, someone else was taking charge. And honestly, I was grateful. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, we were sitting inside a law office downtown. Richard Bennett looked older than I remembered. His hair had turned completely white. His shoulders seemed slightly stooped. but his eyes were still sharp, very sharp. The moment he saw me, genuine concern appeared on his face. "Thelma." He stood and embraced me warmly. "It's been too long." "Yes. Frank would be angry with both of us." That made me laugh despite everything. Frank always hated when people lost touch. After a few minutes of conversation, Bennett became serious. "What brings you here?" I exchanged a glance with Linda. Then I told him everything, every detail, every document, every conversation, every suspicion. As I spoke, Bennett remained silent. He occasionally took notes, occasionally nodded, but what struck me most was what he didn't do. He didn't look surprised. Not once. By the time I finished, my heart was pounding. I waited for his reaction. Instead, Bennett leaned back slowly in his chair. Then he removed his glasses and sighed. A long sigh. The kind a person makes when a suspicion has finally been confirmed. My stomach tightened. "Richard." He looked directly at me. "Thelma, I need to ask you something." "Okay." "Has Ryan been pressuring you to sign documents?" The question startled me. "Why would you ask that?" His expression darkened, because he already knew the answer. The realization hit me immediately. I leaned forward. "Richard." My voice barely came out. "What aren't you telling me?" For several seconds he remained silent. Then he opened a file drawer beside his desk. Inside sat a thick folder. My name was written on the tab. Thelma Hughes. My pulse quickened. Bennett removed the folder and placed it on the desk. Then he looked directly at me. "Thelma Ryan came to see me 7 months ago." The room suddenly felt smaller. "What?" "7 months ago." I stared at him. My mind struggled to process the words. Ryan, my son, meeting with our attorney, without telling me, without telling anyone. "Why?" Bennett folded his hands. He claimed he was exploring future planning options. Future planning. The same phrase again. Always the same phrase. I felt sick. What kind of planning? Asset control. The words landed like stones. Property management. Another stone. Long-term authority provisions. Another. I couldn't breathe. Linda squeezed my shoulder. Bennett continued carefully. "He asked detailed questions regarding your estate." "My estate?" "Yes." "What did you tell him?" "The truth." Bennett's voice hardened slightly. "I told him that none of those decisions belonged to him." A wave of relief washed through me. At least someone had pushed back. But another question immediately surfaced. "Did he stop?" Bennett's silence gave me the answer before he spoke. "No." My chest tightened again. "What happened?" "He returned twice." Twice. My own son had made multiple visits, multiple attempts, multiple inquiries, and never once mentioned any of it. I felt tears forming again, but Bennett wasn't finished. "The second visit concerned me." I swallowed hard. "Why?" "Because Ryan wasn't asking hypothetical questions anymore." The room went quiet. He appeared to be looking for ways to gain authority. My heart shattered. Not because I hadn't suspected it, because hearing it confirmed made it real. Terribly real. Then Bennett said something neither Linda nor I expected. "Fortunately, Frank prepared for this possibility." I blinked. "What?" For the first time during the meeting, a faint smile appeared on Bennett's face. "Your husband was a very careful man." That sounded exactly like Frank. Bennett opened the folder. Inside were several legal documents. Some I recognized, others I didn't. Several years before his death, Frank requested additional protections. I stared at him. Protections from what? Bennett's answer stunned me. From anyone attempting to exploit you financially. My eyes widened. Even Linda looked surprised. Bennett continued. Frank worried about elder financial abuse. I could almost hear Frank's voice. He had always read articles about scams targeting seniors, always warned friends to be careful. Apparently, he had worried about me too, more than I realized. Bennett turned several pages. Frank instructed me to create safeguards. What kind of safeguards? Legal barriers. My pulse quickened. Meaning certain assets cannot be transferred, sold, reassigned, or controlled without multiple levels of review. For the first time in weeks, genuine hope appeared. Ryan didn't know this. Vanessa didn't know this. At least I didn't think they did. Bennett looked at me carefully. Thelma, I want copies of every document they've shown you. I can do that. And if they ask you to sign anything at all, you contact me immediately. I nodded. I will. Then he said something that sent another chill through me. Thelma, I believe they're moving faster than you realize. The room fell silent. What do you mean? Bennett closed the folder. His expression turned grave. Based on the inquiries Ryan made, I don't think they're merely planning. My stomach dropped. I think they've already started. Those words followed me all the way home. Because if Richard Bennett was right, Ryan and Vanessa weren't preparing to take my future. They were already trying, and very soon they would invite me to dinner and place documents directly in front of me, documents they fully expected me to sign. Documents they believed would finally give them everything they wanted. 3 days after my meeting with Richard Bennett, Ryan called and invited me to dinner. The moment I saw his name appear on my phone screen, I knew exactly what was coming. Richard had predicted it. Now, it was happening. Hey, Mom, Ryan said warmly. His voice sounded exactly as it always had. Friendly, relaxed. Loving. That was the hardest part. If he had sounded cruel, this would have been easier. If he had sounded selfish, I could have hated him. Instead, he sounded like my son, the same son who once brought me handmade Mother's Day cards, the same son whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the same son I had trusted with my heart. Hi, sweetheart. Vanessa and I were hoping you'd come over Friday night. For dinner. Yeah. A brief pause followed. Then he added casually, We've got a few things we'd like to discuss. There it was. I forced myself to remain calm. That sounds nice. After we hung up, I immediately called Richard. His response was simple. Go. Go. Absolutely. What if they ask me to sign something? They will. The certainty in his voice made me nervous. What should I do? Take the documents. That's it. Take them. He paused. Don't sign. Friday evening arrived sooner than I wanted. As I drove toward Ryan's house, my stomach churned. I felt as though I were heading into a courtroom rather than a family dinner. The house looked exactly the same as always. The porch lights glowed warmly. The flower beds were neatly maintained. The American flag near the front entrance moved gently in the breeze. From the outside, everything appeared normal, but I knew better now. Appearances could lie. Ryan greeted me at the door with a hug. Mom. His smile seemed genuine. For one dangerous moment, I almost doubted everything. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe there was another explanation. Maybe Richard was wrong. Then I remembered standing behind that kitchen door. She'll never know. The words returned instantly. No, I hadn't imagined any of it. Inside, Vanessa greeted me enthusiastically. "Thelma, you look wonderful." I smiled politely. "So do you." The dining room table had been set beautifully. Candles, fresh flowers, my favorite dishes. The entire evening felt carefully planned. Too carefully planned. Dinner began pleasantly enough. We discussed neighbors, church events, local news. Ryan told funny stories about work. Vanessa laughed at all the appropriate moments. To an outsider, we looked like the perfect family. But beneath every smile, tension simmered. Waiting, watching, building. Eventually, the conversation shifted. I knew it would. Vanessa was the first to bring it up. "Thelma, how have you been feeling lately?" There it was. I set down my fork. "Fine." "Any dizziness?" "No." "Balance issues?" No." Ryan joined in. "Mom, we're just concerned." Concern. That word again. Always concern. Always protection. Always caring. Different packaging. Same agenda. I nodded politely. "I appreciate that." Vanessa leaned forward. "We just want to make sure you're safe." Safe. I almost laughed. Instead, I remained silent. Ryan exchanged a glance with her. A glance they probably thought I didn't notice. Then he began discussing aging, health, future planning, long-term care. Exactly as Richard had predicted, for nearly 20 minutes they painted a picture of growing older. Medical emergencies, falls, isolation, risk, fear, every possible concern. The message was clear. You can't live alone forever. Eventually, Vanessa introduced the next topic. Assisted living. Again. The same facility I had heard mentioned before. This time she came prepared. Brochures appeared, photographs, information packets. She slid them across the table toward me. "Look how beautiful it is." The facility certainly looked attractive. Landscaped gardens, private apartments, activity centers, professional staff. None of that mattered, because I now understood the real conversation hiding underneath. The facility wasn't the goal. The house was. I glanced through the brochure. "It looks nice." Ryan smiled. "Doesn't it?" I nodded, then waited. The next move belonged to them. Sure enough, Vanessa stood and retrieved a leather folder, the same kind of folder she'd used before. She placed it gently on the table. My pulse quickened. "Here it comes." "Thelma," she said softly. "We've been doing some planning." Planning. Another familiar word. Inside the folder sat multiple documents. Some appeared official. Others looked newly prepared. Vanessa opened the folder and began explaining. Healthcare provisions, emergency authority, property management contingencies, financial oversight options. The language sounded reasonable, at least on the surface. I recognized several terms Richard had specifically warned me about. Temporary authority, conditional access, asset management, protective oversight. The words sounded harmless, helpful even. That was exactly what made them dangerous. Ryan watched me closely, far too closely, like a salesman waiting for a customer to make a purchase. "Mom," he said gently, "this is all about making things easier for you." I looked at him, really looked at him. For a brief moment, I wondered whether he believed his own lies. Maybe he had convinced himself that taking control was helping. Maybe greed had become so normalized that he no longer recognized it. Or maybe he knew exactly what he was doing. I still wasn't sure. Vanessa pointed to several signature lines. "We don't need to do everything tonight." Her smile never wavered. "But it would be helpful to get started." Helpful. Of course. Always helpful. I slowly turned pages while pretending to review the documents. In reality, I was studying them carefully, memorizing them, preparing to take them directly to Richard. Several provisions immediately concerned me. One section involved financial decision-making authority. Another referenced property management rights. A third contained language regarding residential transitions. Residential transitions. Such a harmless phrase. A pleasant phrase. A deceptive phrase. It really meant moving someone out of their home, exactly what I had overheard them discussing. My chest tightened. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Ryan leaned forward. "What do you think?" The question hung in the air. This was the moment. The moment they expected compliance. The moment they expected weakness. The moment they expected an elderly widow to trust her family. Instead, I smiled. A gentle smile. The same smile I had worn countless times throughout my life. "I'd like to review everything first." A flash of disappointment crossed Vanessa's face. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. Ryan recovered quickly. "Of course. No rush." The lie was obvious. There was absolutely a rush. Otherwise, they wouldn't have arranged this dinner. Otherwise, they wouldn't have prepared all these documents. Otherwise, Vanessa wouldn't have spent weeks asking questions about my house. Still, I maintained my calm. "I'll take these home." "That's probably a good idea," Ryan agreed. But something in his expression had changed. A hint of concern. Perhaps even suspicion. Maybe he sensed I wasn't as vulnerable as before. Maybe he realized something was different. As dinner ended, I gathered the folder. Vanessa's eyes followed every movement, watching, calculating, measuring. The drive home felt strangely empowering. For months I had been reacting, fearful, confused, uncertain. Now I had information, evidence, direction. Most importantly, I had allies. Richard Bennett, Linda Parker, and whatever protections Frank had secretly created before his death. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked at the folder resting on the passenger seat. Ryan and Vanessa believed they were getting closer to their goal. They believed I was slowly surrendering control. They believed I remained unaware. What they didn't realize was that every document they handed me was bringing me closer to the truth. And soon I would need more than paperwork. I would need proof. Real proof. Proof that revealed exactly what they planned to do with my house. Proof that exposed who was truly behind everything, and that proof was coming sooner than any of us expected. The following week, Richard Bennett reviewed every document Ryan and Vanessa had given me. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. By the time it ended, I understood something important. My instincts had been right all along. Several of the documents were carefully written to appear harmless. Most people would never question them, especially someone who trusted the people presenting them. But hidden inside the legal language were provisions that could gradually shift significant authority away from me. Not immediately, not obviously, slowly, piece by piece. Exactly the kind of strategy that succeeds because it doesn't feel like theft. It feels like assistance. When Richard finished explaining everything, he closed the folder and looked at me. "Thelma, we need stronger evidence." I nodded. "I know." We need proof of intent. Intent. That single word would become critical, because suspicion wasn't enough. Even concerning documents weren't enough. We needed proof that Ryan and Vanessa knowingly planned to exploit me. Proof they understood exactly what they were doing. Proof they couldn't explain away later. That's when Richard proposed something unexpected. Let them talk. I frowned. What do you mean? They think you're cooperating. They do? Good. A faint smile crossed his face. Use that. The idea made me uncomfortable. I had spent my entire life being honest. Now I was being asked to pretend, to mislead, to act. But Richard was right. For the first time, Ryan and Vanessa believed they were winning. That confidence could become their weakness. A few days later, an opportunity presented itself. Ryan called and invited me over again. This time he sounded unusually cheerful. Mom Vanessa wants to show you a few things. I immediately understood. They thought progress was being made. They expected me to move closer to signing. Perfect. I'd love to stop by. After hanging up, I opened a small box sitting on my kitchen counter. Inside was a digital recorder Richard had suggested I carry. Simple, legal, reliable. Just in case. I stared at it for several moments. The entire situation felt surreal. Mothers aren't supposed to record their children. Mothers aren't supposed to gather evidence against their sons. But mothers also aren't supposed to be betrayed by them. That evening, I drove to Ryan's house. The recorder rested quietly inside my purse. When Vanessa opened the door, her smile seemed brighter than usual, almost triumphant. Thelma. She hugged me warmly, too warmly. Inside, everything felt carefully arranged. Coffee waited on the table. Dessert had been prepared. The atmosphere felt less like a family visit and more like a business meeting disguised as one. We spent nearly 30 minutes discussing ordinary topics. Then Vanessa finally moved the conversation where she wanted it. The facility called. I pretended to look interested. Oh, they have availability. There it was. The facility. Again. Ryan sat beside her, watching me, waiting. I nodded slowly. That's good. Vanessa's eyes brightened. You've been thinking about it. I deliberately hesitated. Then I answered. A little. The effect was immediate. Both of them relaxed. Not dramatically, just enough. The kind of relaxation people experience when they believe resistance is fading. Ryan smiled. Mom, we really think this would be best. Best. Such a convenient word. Best for whom, I wondered. Certainly not for me. The conversation continued, and gradually something remarkable happened. They stopped trying to persuade me, because they believed persuasion was no longer necessary. Instead, they began discussing plans, actual plans, future plans, specific plans. Exactly what Richard hoped would happen. Vanessa leaned forward. Once everything is finalized, life will be much easier. Everything. Finalized. Interesting choice of words. I remained silent. She continued talking. The house won't be a burden anymore. My pulse quickened. The house. There it was. Again. I took a sip of coffee, trying to appear calm, trying not to reveal how closely I was listening. Ryan nodded. We've already looked at several options. Several options. My stomach tightened. How many conversations had they already had without me? How many decisions had they already made? Vanessa continued. The market is still strong. Strong. Another real estate word. Another clue. Another piece. Then she made a mistake. A very important mistake. She forgot to be careful. We should be able to sell quickly. Sell. Not if. Not maybe. Sell. The word hung in the room. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. I felt my heart pounding. There it was. A direct statement. Not speculation. Not planning. Expectation. Ryan immediately glanced toward her. He realized it too. The slip. The mistake. Vanessa recovered quickly. I mean, if that becomes necessary. But the damage was already done. The recorder inside my purse captured every word. As the evening continued, their confidence grew, and with confidence came carelessness. The conversation shifted toward finances, debt, expenses, future opportunities. Then I heard something that hurt more than anything else. Vanessa sighed dramatically. Honestly, once the property is handled, we'll finally be able to breathe. Property. Not Mom. Not Thelma. Property. That was how she saw my home. Not the place where Frank and I built a life. Not the place where Ryan took his first steps. Not the place filled with 40 years of memories. Property. An asset. A solution to financial problems. I felt physically ill, but I stayed calm. Because every word mattered. Every sentence mattered. Every admission mattered. Then came the biggest revelation of the night. The one that changed everything. Ryan stood and walked into the kitchen. Vanessa followed. They apparently assumed I couldn't hear them clearly. They were wrong. The recorder could. And so could I. Their voices carried down the hallway. Quiet, but understandable. Ryan sounded nervous. Maybe we're moving too fast. For one brief second, hope flickered inside me. Maybe he still had doubts. Maybe there was still some conscience left. Then Vanessa responded. Ryan, we've already committed. Committed. Not considered. Not discussed. Committed. The word revealed everything. This wasn't an idea. It was a plan. A plan already underway. Ryan sighed. I know. Vanessa lowered her voice. The house solves everything. Everything. Debt. Money. Their future. Their problems. Everything. Then she spoke the sentence that shattered my final illusion. If your mother's signs were set. Your mother. Not Mom. Not family. Not someone to love. Someone to sign. Someone standing between them and what they wanted. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan answered, and his answer broke my heart. She will. No hesitation. No guilt. No conflict. Just certainty. She will. At that moment, I stopped searching for excuses. For months, I had wondered whether Vanessa was manipulating him, whether he was confused, whether he was trapped, whether he was simply weak. Now I knew the truth. Ryan understood exactly what was happening. He wasn't a victim. He was a participant, a willing participant. The realization hurt more than any document, more than any legal scheme, more than any financial betrayal, because money can be recovered. Property can be protected, but trust, once broken trust, rarely returns. I drove home later that night with tears in my eyes, not because I was defeated, Because I finally knew the truth. The recording contained everything Richard needed. Discussions about selling the house. Discussions about moving me. Discussions about financial motivations. Most importantly, it revealed something none of us had fully understood before. Vanessa may have designed the plan, but Ryan chose it, knowingly, willingly, completely. The next morning, Richard Bennett listened to the recording. When it ended, he looked at me with grim satisfaction. "This is exactly what we needed." I nodded slowly. "What happens now?" Richard closed his notebook. A cold smile appeared. "Now we let them believe they're winning." Because in less than 2 weeks, Ryan and Vanessa would walk into a legal meeting expecting to take control of my future. Instead, they were about to discover that Frank Hughes had prepared something waiting for them all along, and that surprise was going to change everything. 2 weeks later, everything came to a head. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning at Richard Bennett's office. Officially, it was supposed to be a simple planning session. At least, that's what Ryan and Vanessa believed. In reality, it was something very different. It was the day the truth would finally step into the light. The days leading up to the meeting felt strangely calm, almost peaceful. For months I had lived with uncertainty, fear, questions, doubt. Now I finally knew what was happening. The evidence existed. The recordings existed. The documents existed. Most importantly, Richard had a plan. For the first time since overhearing that conversation behind the kitchen door, I no longer felt powerless. That didn't mean I wasn't hurt. The pain remained. Every time Ryan called me Mom, it hurt. Every time Vanessa smiled at me, it hurt. Every memory felt different now. But pain and powerlessness are not the same thing. I had learned that lesson the hard way. Wednesday morning arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. I remember thinking how strange it was that such a beautiful day could carry so much heartbreak. When I arrived at Richard's office, Linda was already there. She squeezed my hand as I entered the conference room. "You okay?" I nodded. Not because I was okay, because there was no turning back. 10 minutes later, Ryan and Vanessa arrived. The confidence on their faces immediately caught my attention. They looked relaxed, comfortable, certain. Vanessa carried a leather folder. Ryan carried a coffee cup. Neither of them appeared nervous. Why would they? They believed everything was under control. When Ryan saw me, he smiled warmly. "Morning, Mom." The familiar greeting landed differently now. I smiled politely. "Good morning." Vanessa hugged me. The gesture felt rehearsed, artificial, like everything else. Richard entered a few moments later carrying several files. Unlike the rest of us, he showed no emotion, no smile, no warmth, just quiet professionalism. After everyone took their seats, the meeting began. Vanessa spoke first. "We appreciate you helping us organize everything." Richard nodded. "Of course." Then he looked toward me. "Thelma, have you reviewed the documents that were provided?" "I have." Ryan leaned forward slightly. "And?" There was anticipation in his eyes, expectation, hope. I wondered if he already imagined the outcome. Perhaps he was picturing my house sold. Perhaps he was imagining debts paid. Perhaps he was imagining a future financed by the life Frank and I built together. The thought made me sad. Not angry, sad. Because greed changes people. Sometimes so gradually they don't even recognize themselves anymore. "I reviewed them carefully," I replied. Ryan smiled. "That's great." Richard opened one of his folders, then another, then another. The atmosphere in the room shifted almost immediately. Vanessa noticed it first. Her smile faded slightly. "What's all this?" Richard folded his hands. "Documentation." The single word sounded heavier than expected. Ryan exchanged a quick glance with Vanessa. A small glance. But I saw it. For the first time that morning, uncertainty appeared. Richard continued. "Before discussing any future planning, there are several matters requiring clarification." Vanessa frowned. "What kind of matters?" Richard opened a file. The sound of paper seemed unusually loud. Then he looked directly at Ryan. "Mr. Hughes, could you explain your prior inquiries regarding authority over your mother's assets?" The color immediately drained from Ryan's face. The reaction was impossible to miss. He hadn't expected this. Neither had Vanessa. Ryan attempted a nervous smile. "I'm not sure what you mean." Richard slid several documents across the table. "I believe you do." Silence. Ryan stared at the papers. The room felt frozen. Vanessa leaned forward. "What are those?" Richard answered calmly. "Records of consultations conducted approximately 7 months ago." No one spoke. Ryan's expression continued changing. Confidence, confusion, concern, fear. One emotion replacing another. Vanessa finally broke the silence. "Those were just planning discussions." Richard nodded. "So you acknowledge they occurred?" Another trap. Another mistake. Vanessa realized it immediately. Too late. Richard continued. "Interesting." He opened another file. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. I could hear my own heartbeat. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw him struggling. Not because he felt guilty, because he realized control was slipping away. Then Richard introduced the next piece of evidence. The property records, the document requests, the inquiries, the consultations, one by one, methodically, relentlessly. Each revelation pushed Ryan and Vanessa further into the corner. Still, they continued trying to explain, trying to minimize, trying to redirect. Until Richard finally reached the recording. The recording. The moment everything changed. He placed a small device on the conference table. Vanessa's eyes immediately narrowed. Ryan looked confused. "What is that?" Richard looked directly at him. "Evidence." The word landed like a hammer. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Richard pressed play. The room filled with familiar voices. Ryan's voice, Vanessa's voice, the conversations I had secretly recorded, the discussions about the facility, the discussions about the house, the discussions about selling, the discussions about debt, the discussions about me. Every word sounded even worse than I remembered, because now everyone could hear it. No explanations, no excuses, no misunderstandings, just the truth. Raw, clear, undeniable. As the recording played, Ryan's face turned pale. Vanessa stopped looking confident altogether. At one point, she attempted to interrupt. Richard raised a hand. "No." The recording continued. Then came the sentence. The sentence that changed everything. "The house solves everything." Silence followed. Absolute silence. Nobody could explain that away. Nobody could reinterpret it. Nobody could pretend it meant something else. The room remained quiet long after the recording ended. Finally, Richard spoke. Would either of you like to explain? Neither answered, because there was nothing left to explain. The truth had already spoken for them. Ryan stared at the table. Vanessa stared at the wall. Neither looked at me. Neither seemed capable of looking at me, and for the first time in months I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not confidence, not control, not manipulation. Fear. Real fear. Because they had entered that office believing they were one signature away from victory. Instead, they had walked directly into evidence they never knew existed. Yet Richard wasn't finished. Not even close. The recordings were only the beginning. The documents were only the beginning. The real surprise, the one Frank Hughes had secretly prepared years earlier, was still waiting. And when Richard finally revealed it, everything Ryan and Vanessa thought they knew about my house, my assets, and my future would collapse in a matter of minutes. The silence inside Richard Bennett's conference room felt almost unbearable. No one moved. No one spoke. The recording had ended nearly 30 seconds earlier, yet the words still seemed to hang in the air. The house solves everything. I watched Ryan stare down at the polished conference table. His shoulders looked smaller somehow, not because he was sorry, because he had been caught. There is a difference, a very important difference. For months I had hoped there was some misunderstanding, some innocent explanation, some hidden reason that would allow me to recognize the son I raised. That hope finally died in that room. Vanessa recovered first. She always did. Even now. Even cornered. Even exposed. She straightened in her chair and crossed her arms. You're making this sound worse than it is. Richard didn't react. What exactly are we making sound worse? Vanessa gestured impatiently. We were trying to help. Help. The word almost made me laugh. Almost. I thought about the secret conversations, the missing documents, the property inquiries, the legal forms, the discussions about moving me, the plans to sell my home. And somehow, according to Vanessa, all of that was help. Richard calmly opened another file. I see. His voice remained completely professional. Then perhaps you can explain why these documents contain alterations. Vanessa froze. Ryan looked up immediately. What alterations? Richard slid several papers across the table. For the first time, genuine panic appeared in Vanessa's eyes. Not concern, not frustration, panic. The documents included copies of forms that had been reviewed by a forensic document examiner, not criminal-level forgery, not yet, but enough irregularities to raise serious questions. Several signatures appeared incomplete. Certain initials seemed inconsistent. Dates had been modified. Small changes. Dangerous changes. The kind of changes that attract legal attention. My stomach tightened as I examined the paperwork. Until that moment, even I hadn't realized how far things had gone. Richard looked directly at Ryan. Can you explain why your mother's initials appear on paperwork she never reviewed? Ryan immediately turned toward Vanessa. What is he talking about? The reaction surprised me. For a brief moment, he looked genuinely confused. Vanessa answered too quickly. I don't know. It was an obvious lie. Everyone in the room recognized it. Richard remained calm. The records suggest otherwise. The pressure continued building. One piece of evidence after another. One inconsistency after another. One contradiction after another. Eventually, the room became too small to contain the truth anymore. Vanessa finally snapped. Her composure shattered. This is ridiculous. Her voice echoed off the conference room walls. We've spent years helping her. I flinched slightly, not because she was yelling, because of how she said it. Helping her. As though kindness created ownership, as though caring for someone earned the right to control them. Richard remained unimpressed. Helping someone does not grant ownership of their property. Vanessa looked furious. Ryan looked terrified. Then Richard opened the final folder. The folder Frank had prepared years before his death. The folder that changed everything. Richard carefully removed several documents. Unlike the others, these were original records. Official. Executed. Binding. Protected. I immediately recognized Frank's signature. The sight of his handwriting nearly brought tears to my eyes. Even after all this time, seeing his name felt like seeing him. Richard looked toward me, then toward Ryan, then toward Vanessa, and finally spoke. Your husband anticipated this possibility. The room went silent again. Ryan frowned. What possibility? Richard didn't hesitate. Financial exploitation. The words landed heavily. Vanessa's face turned pale. Ryan stared in disbelief. What? Richard continued. Several years before his death, Frank Hughes instructed our office to establish extensive protective measures. I felt my heart swell with emotion. That sounded exactly like Frank. Always thinking ahead, always preparing, always protecting, even from beyond the grave. Richard opened the first document. The residence located in Columbus was transferred into an irrevocable protective trust. Ryan blinked. What does that mean? Richard answered immediately. It means the property cannot be transferred, reassigned, sold, pledged, or otherwise controlled without satisfying very specific legal requirements. Vanessa's face lost all color. For the first time, she looked genuinely frightened. Richard continued. The trust was specifically designed to prevent unauthorized attempts to obtain control of the property. I almost smiled. Frank. Even now, Frank was protecting me. Even now, he was several steps ahead. Ryan looked stunned. You mean, the house cannot be sold through any of the methods you discussed? Silence. Absolute silence. Then came the moment I will never forget. Vanessa turned toward Ryan, and everything exploded. You told me that wasn't a problem. The accusation came instantly, sharp, angry, desperate. Ryan stared at her. What are you talking about? You said everything was straightforward. I only knew what you told me. Vanessa laughed bitterly. Oh, now it's my fault. The argument escalated immediately. Months of pressure, fear, greed, frustration, all erupting at once. Neither of them remembered I was sitting there. Neither remembered the reason they were in the room. They only remembered the dream that had just collapsed. The money, the house, the future they thought they were building. Vanessa pointed directly at Ryan. You wanted this as much as I did. The words echoed through the room. Ryan's face turned red. No. Yes. No. You pushed your mother toward that facility. I felt a fresh wave of heartbreak. Not because the accusation surprised me, because it confirmed everything. Vanessa wasn't exposing new information. She was confirming old information. Information I already knew. Information I desperately wished wasn't true. Ryan stood suddenly. That's not what happened. Vanessa laughed. A harsh, ugly laugh. Really? She pointed toward me. Then why did you tell me she'd sign? The room went silent. Again. Ryan couldn't answer. Because he had said it. I had heard it myself. The recording proved it. She'll sign. The memory returned instantly. Ryan slowly sat back down. Defeated, for several moments nobody spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. At this point, I strongly recommend both of you obtain independent legal counsel. The meaning was obvious. This situation had moved beyond family disagreement. Potential elder financial exploitation, questionable document activity, misrepresentation, attempts to gain authority over assets. None of it looked good. Not legally, not morally, not emotionally. Ryan stared at me for the first time in nearly an hour. His eyes looked different now. Not confident, not defensive. Broken. Mom. The single word nearly shattered me, because despite everything, he was still my son, my only child, the little boy whose nightmares I soothed, the teenager whose heartbreaks I comforted, the man I believed would protect me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I answered quietly, I trusted you. Those 3 words carried decades of love and years of betrayal. Ryan looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Perhaps because there was nothing left to say. No explanation could undo what happened. No apology could erase months of deception. No excuse could restore trust once broken this deeply. As the meeting ended, Vanessa left first. Without another word, without another glance, without another attempt to pretend she cared. Ryan followed several minutes later, slowly, silently, alone. I watched him walk out of the office, and for the first time I understood something painful. The greatest loss wasn't the house. The greatest loss wasn't the money. The greatest loss was realizing the son I loved had chosen greed over loyalty. Yet even as that chapter ended, another was beginning. Because legal consequences were coming, Vanessa's marriage was already collapsing, Ryan's life was unraveling, and I was finally about to reclaim something they had nearly taken from me. Not my house, not my assets, my peace. The weeks after the meeting felt strangely quiet. For months, my life had been consumed by questions. What were Ryan and Vanessa planning? How far had they gone? Could I trust my own son? Now I finally had answers. The truth wasn't comforting, but at least it was the truth. And sometimes truth, no matter how painful, is the first step toward peace. In the days that followed, Richard Bennett helped me take several protective measures. Nothing dramatic, nothing vindictive. That was never my goal. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in safety, clarity, boundaries, the things I should have established much sooner. Several questionable documents were formally withdrawn. Additional legal protections were added to existing records. Financial access permissions were reviewed and restricted. Everything was documented carefully, professionally, properly. For the first time in a very long while, I felt secure. Not because I trusted other people, because I trusted myself again. That may not sound important, but after betrayal, self-trust becomes priceless. You start questioning your judgment, your instincts, your decisions, your memories. I had spent months wondering whether I was imagining things, whether I was overreacting, whether I was being unfair. Now I knew I hadn't been wrong. My instincts had tried to protect me, and finally I had listened. As for Vanessa, her marriage began falling apart almost immediately. According to mutual friends, she moved out within a month. The details didn't interest me much. By then, I had learned something important. People who build relationships around greed rarely create stable foundations. Eventually, greed turns inward. Eventually, it consumes everyone involved. Ryan and Vanessa spent months blaming each other, arguing, accusing, defending themselves. Neither seemed willing to accept responsibility, at least not at first. The hardest part, however, wasn't watching their marriage collapse. The hardest part was watching my relationship with my son collapse. That wound cut deeper than anything else. Several weeks passed without hearing from him. No calls, no texts, no visits. Part of me was relieved. Another part was heartbroken. I missed him, even after everything. That's the difficult truth many people don't understand. Love doesn't disappear simply because someone hurts you. A mother's love is especially stubborn. It survives disappointment. It survives distance. Sometimes it even survives betrayal. One afternoon, about 2 months after the meeting, Ryan appeared at my front door. I wasn't expecting him. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted, older, thinner. His confidence was gone. The version of Ryan standing on my porch looked nothing like the man who had once sat across from me discussing facilities and paperwork. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Can we talk?" I considered saying no. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted him to experience rejection, pain, consequences. But that wasn't who I wanted to become. So I stepped aside. "Come in." We sat in the living room. The same living room where he opened Christmas presents as a child. The same room where Frank taught him how to play chess. The same room he had once hoped to take away from me. Life has a strange sense of irony. For several minutes, Ryan stared at the floor. Then he finally spoke. "I don't expect forgiveness." Good. Because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. Many people confuse them. I listened quietly. Ryan took a deep breath. "I made terrible choices." Yes, he had. "I kept telling myself I was helping." Another pause. "But I wasn't." For the first time, I heard genuine regret. Not regret about getting caught, regret about what he had become. There is a difference. A huge difference. Tears appeared in his eyes. "I failed you." The words hurt, because they were true. Yet hearing him admit it also brought a strange sense of relief. For months he had hidden behind excuses. Now, at last, he was facing reality. I remained silent. Eventually, Ryan asked the question I knew was coming. "Do you think you'll ever trust me again?" The room became very quiet. I looked toward Frank's photograph resting on the mantel, then back at my son. I answered honestly, "I don't know." The tears started falling immediately, for both of us, because honesty isn't always comforting. Sometimes honesty hurts, but it is still better than lies, especially family lies. Ryan nodded slowly, as though he already expected that answer. Perhaps he did. Before leaving, he hugged me. The embrace felt different. Not healed, not restored. Just honest. And honestly was a beginning. Nothing more, nothing less. The months continued passing. Life gradually settled into a new rhythm. I repainted parts of the house, planted flowers in the garden, joined a local community volunteer program, spent more time with Linda, started attending social events I had previously avoided. Little by little, I rebuilt my life. Not because everything was fixed, because healing requires movement. One afternoon while planting roses, I found myself thinking about Frank. about the protections he had quietly created years earlier, about how much he loved me, about how carefully he planned. And suddenly I smiled. Not because I missed him less, because I finally understood something. Love isn't measured by grand speeches, it's measured by actions. Frank protected me when he was alive, and somehow through his wisdom and preparation, he protected me after he was gone. That realization brought comfort I cannot fully describe. Today, I still live in the same house filled with memories, the same house Ryan and Vanessa once believed they could control. Every photograph remains exactly where it belongs. Every room still carries Frank's presence. Most importantly, every decision made within these walls belongs to me, as it should. My relationship with Ryan remains complicated. Some wounds heal slowly, some scars never disappear completely, but healing doesn't require forgetting, and forgiveness doesn't require surrendering your boundaries. Those lessons cost me dearly, yet they may be the most valuable lessons I've ever learned. Because in the end, the greatest victory wasn't protecting my home. The greatest victory was remembering that kindness and vulnerability are not weakness. They never were. The people who tried to take advantage of me believed age made me powerless. They were wrong. I was stronger than they imagined, and stronger than I imagined too. Life has taught me that love and trust are precious gifts, but they should never come at the cost of your dignity, your independence, or your voice. Many of us were raised to believe that family should always be trusted. While family can be one of life's greatest blessings, it is important to remember that healthy relationships require honesty, respect, and boundaries. Growing older does not make you less valuable. It does not mean your opinions matter less. It does not mean you should surrender control of your life simply because someone claims they know what's best for you. Listen to your instincts. Ask questions. Read every document carefully. Seek professional advice when something feels wrong. Most importantly, never mistake kindness for weakness. You can be compassionate and still protect yourself. The strongest lesson I learned is that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. You may choose to forgive someone for your own peace, but rebuilding trust is something that must be earned. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my situation? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join our community for more emotional family stories. And before you go, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Thank you for spending this journey with me.